$20 billion. Just let that number sink in for a second.
Yeah.
That's the estimated scale of this dairy scandal we're looking at today.
Yeah.
It's huge, rocking a global industry worth, what, $700 billion?
That's right. And it really cuts deep, you know? We're
Yeah.
talking mislabeled products, this thing called milk laundering. It feels like a real betrayal.
A betrayal for everyone.
Right.
Consumers buying milk they trust.
Yeah.
Small farmers just trying to make a living. Even the regulator's supposed to be watching over things.
Absolutely. So our deep dive today is all about unpacking this $20 billion scandal. We'll use the information we've got to really try and understand it.
Okay.
Not just what happened, but maybe how it could happen on this scale and what the fallout might be. Because that, that wholesome image of dairy, it's definitely taken a hit.
It really has. Okay, let's get into it. When you think dairy, it's fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah.
Milk, cheese, yogurt. Basics.
Mm.
And the scale shows that. $700 billion globally. Here in the U.S., over $600 billion added to the economy every year. Millions of jobs. It sounds like this powerhouse industry. Untouchable almost.
That's the perception, yeah. But what's interesting is the contrast. You've got this massive size, but underneath there's a real fragility.
Fragility? How so?
Well, it's fiercely competitive. And it's dominated by just a handful of really big multinational corporations.
Right.
And these companies, they hold a lot of sway over the whole supply chain.
And it sounds like that power hasn't always been used, well, fairly. Because while these giants are operating, the smaller dairy farmers,
Right.
the backbone, really,
Yeah.
they've been having a really tough time.
Incredibly tough. You've got rising costs, feed, equipment, everything, then milk prices that swing wildly, plus this constant pressure to consolidate.
It's pushed so many to the edge. I saw a figure.
Yeah.
Average income for a U.S. dairy farmer, sometimes less than $20,000 a year, for incredibly hard work.
It's incredibly demanding work, yes. And that's the critical point. These farmers were already under immense pressure.
So how does this massive $20 billion scandal fit into that? Does it make it worse?
Oh, absolutely. It's like pouring salt on the wound. It adds this huge destabilizing factor by revealing practices that completely undermine the fair market they desperately need.
Okay, so let's talk specifics. The big headlines are fraud and mislabeling. What does that actually mean when, you or I go to buy milk?
At its core, the allegation is widespread deception by major dairy companies about their products.
Deception how?
Everything from, say, exaggerating nutritional benefits on the label to outright lying about where the milk came from or how it was produced.
Can you give an example? Like what kind of false claims?
Well, the sources mention things like companies selling milk labeled 100% local or organic when actually it was being mixed.
Mixed with what?
Cheaper milk, often imported milk, maybe from places with different farming standards or milk produced using conventional methods, not organic ones.
And the scale of this,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just a little bit here and there.
Apparently not. We're talking millions of gallons,
Sure.
potentially affecting something like 50 million consumers just in the U.S.
50 million, that's
Yeah.
staggering. It suggests this wasn't just a few bad apples.
The scale points towards something more organized, maybe even systemic, rather than just isolated mistakes. It implies practices embedded within major companies.
Oh.
And then there are the health worries. If you're misled about hormones, antibiotics, or maybe contaminants from milk brought in under different rules, that's a real risk, especially for certain groups.
Yeah, definitely.
But beyond health, it's the trust issue. People rely on labels being accurate. This just shatters that trust.
It really does. Makes you question everything. And then there's this term, milk laundering. It sounds illicit, like something from finance, not farming. What's that about?
It's basically a scheme to inflate profits artificially.
Okay.
It means taking cheaper milk, often from countries maybe with looser regulations, and blending it with more expensive, locally produced milk.
And then selling it as if it's all the high-quality local stuff.
Exactly. Passing it off as premium, entirely local milk.
So potentially milk that doesn't meet the same safety standards.
Mm.
Maybe containing stuff banned locally or transported under less strict conditions.
That's the worry, yes. The imported milk might come from farms using substances prohibited here, or the transport might not follow the same strict sanitary rules.
And this wasn't a short-term thing.
What's shocking, according to the sources, is how long it allegedly went on, at least a decade,
A decade.
generating an estimated $20 billion in illegal profits. How does something that big stay hidden for so long?
10 years, $20 billion.
Oh, fair.
That implies a really sophisticated operation, not just cutting a few corners.
No, it suggests a complex network. The sources talk about suppliers, distributors, other middlemen, possibly even with executives knowing about it or, being involved.
Right.
And it really highlights how important whistleblowers are, the people who took risks to bring this out into the open.
Absolutely. And while consumers are angry about being misled, the impact on the actual farmers,
Mm-hmm.
the ones working the land, sounds like it's been brutal. How have they been hit?
They've really borne the brunt of it. Like we said, small farms were already struggling. Introducing this cheap, laundered milk just tanks prices even further, makes it almost impossible for them to compete fairly.
The stats are grim. Over 3,000 U.S. dairy farms closed in the last 5 years alone.
Yes, and the fear is this scandal will just make that worse, accelerate the trend.
You think about the human cost, families losing farms held for generations, life savings gone, bankruptcy.
It's heartbreaking, and it doesn't stop there. Think about the rural communities that rely on these farms.
Yeah, the ripple effect.
Exactly. Dairy farming is often the economic heart of these areas. Farm closures mean lost jobs, not just on the farm, but for suppliers, dealers. It can lead to population decline, economic stagnation,
The whole community suffers.
and it really exposes the power imbalance, too. These big corporations often dictate prices and distribution terms, usually favoring themselves over the smaller guys.
Even the farmers' co-ops, weren't they meant to help?
They were,
Yeah.
but reports suggest even they've sometimes been influenced or sidelined by the bigger corporate players.
It's just a really tough picture.
Yeah. And the effects go beyond the dairy aisle, don't they? There are wider economic things, environmental issues, too.
Oh, for sure. Dairy is a massive economic contributor overall. Millions of jobs across different sectors. A scandal this big can cause instability that spreads beyond just the farms.
And environmentally. Dairy farming already uses a lot of resources.
Right. And this practice of importing cheap milk, potentially from places with weaker environmental rules, that can make problems like deforestation, water pollution, greenhouse gases worse.
Because they're basically outsourcing the environmental impact.
In a way, yes. Sourcing from places with lower standards lets them avoid those costs.
Plus, just shipping milk long distances has its own footprint, right? Carbon emissions, risk of spoilage. Definitely. It highlights the risks in these long, complex, global supply chains, especially when consumers are increasingly asking for local sustainable food.
Yeah, people are paying more attention to that.
They want transparency, they want sustainability. This scandal flies right in the face of that. Which brings us to a key question.
How did this go on for so long without anyone noticing? Where were the regulators?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? The FDA, the USDA, they're the main agencies. The criticism now is, were they under-resourced? Did they lack teeth for enforcement? Was scrutiny just insufficient?
Or maybe looking the other way.
Well, the sources also mention international trade agreements. Sometimes they prioritize making trade easy over strict safety or quality checks.
They're creating loopholes.
Potentially, yes. Loopholes that companies could exploit by bringing in milk from places with less stringent rules. So now there's huge pressure on regulators here and abroad to tighten up.
They need better oversight, better tracking.
Exactly. Traceability through the supply chain. And much tougher penalties for fraud.
And it seems the public wants that. You mentioned survey data.
Yeah, showing strong support. Like 65% think the government's too soft on food industry violations. 70% want stricter rules. That's a clear message.
Okay, so we have the what and some of the why. Who exactly are the main players caught up in this web of deceit?
The sources point to several big dairy conglomerates. At least 5 are implicated, plus their networks of suppliers and distributors.
Big name.
Significant global players, yeah. Operations across North America, Europe, Asia. The specific company names aren't public yet because of ongoing investigations, legal action.
Right, and it took investigative journalists to break this story.
It seems so, really digging into leaked documents, talking to insiders, doing that essential work to hold powerful companies accountable.
What did they uncover?
Evidence suggesting a culture where, profit just seemed to trump ethics. There was that specific example cited.
The falsified certificates.
Yes, falsified certificates of origin, making milk look like it was premium American-made when it wasn't. It shows deliberate, systematic deception for money.
And now the lawsuits are starting.
Yeah, class action suits are being filed. There's talk of potentially massive fines, maybe even criminal charges reaching high up in these companies.
And this mislabeled milk. Didn't just stay in the milk cartons, did it? It got used in other foods.
That's a really important and worrying part of this. Yes.
How widespread.
It was used as an ingredient in tons of processed foods. Think cheese, yogurt, ice cream, baked goods, anything that uses milk.
Wow.
And those products went everywhere, supermarkets, restaurants, even schools. So millions might have eaten this stuff without knowing.
Which loops back to the health risks, especially for people with allergies or dietary needs.
Yeah.
If you buy something trusting a hormone-free or organic label.
And it's false. That's a serious breach. It's a potential health danger and a fundamental violation of trust.
It also makes you doubt those certifications generally, doesn't it? Organic, non-GMO, if the basic milk ingredient is compromised.
Exactly. How can you trust the label on the final product? And think about the retailers, too. They're stuck dealing with recalls, financial hits, damage to their own reputations for selling these products unknowingly.
It really shows we need much better tracking, doesn't it? Transparency all the way through the supply chain.
Urgently needed. So you can actually verify where ingredients come from and how they've been handled every step of the way.
So, okay, looking forward.
Hmm.
What needs to happen to stop this kind of thing again? How do we rebuild trust?
Well, the sources suggest several key areas for reform. First, definitely stronger regulations.
Really?
Clearer rules for labels and production, more frequent independent audits, and much harsher penalties for violations. Maybe even tech like blockchain for better tracking.
Okay, stronger rules. What else?
Second, real support for small farmers. Policies that give them fair prices, better market access, level the playing field a bit.
Makes sense.
Third, consumer education, helping people understand food origins, what labels mean. Fourth, real corporate accountability. Big financial penalties, maybe restrictions on operating, holding executives personally liable.
Right, not just fines the company can absorb.
Exactly. And finally, better global cooperation. Getting international standards more aligned to close those import loopholes.
This sounds like a lot needs to change. Is anything actually happening yet?
There are some early signs. The USDA says it plans to boost oversight on dairy imports. The EU is apparently looking at its labeling laws again.
So some movement.
Some movement, yes.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to see these as just the first steps. It'll take a sustained effort to get real meaningful change.
And what about us as consumers? Are we just sort of at the mercy of the industry, or do we have a role here?
Oh, absolutely have a role. A powerful one, actually.
How so?
By demanding transparency from companies, by choosing to support producers are ethical, by advocating for stronger rules through how you shop, who you contact politically.
So our choices matter.
Definitely. Even small things, like reading labels carefully, maybe choosing local when you can, it sends a message. And social media now gives consumers a huge platform to share info, raise concerns, push for change.
So this whole $20 billion scandal, it's deeply disturbing, but maybe it's also a wake-up call.
I think that's right. A stark reminder of vulnerabilities in the food system. Corporate greed, weak regulation, lack of transparency.
Things that allowed this deception on such a massive scale.
Precisely. But like you said, maybe it's also an opportunity, a chance to push for a fair system that supports farmers, prevents fraud, and prioritizes sustainable practices.
So for you listening, staying informed on this, thinking about your choices, supporting ethical producers, these are real steps you can take towards a better food system.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a big question, really. This $20 billion scandal. Will it actually be the trigger? The thing that finally forces real lasting change, not just in dairy, but in how we approach our food altogether. Something to think about next time you're at the grocery store.